Did you know that at one point the entirety of Dominaria was completely submerged and underwater? Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. I bring to you today the incredibly interesting story of the God Leviathan. This was a fascinating tale to me. The God Leviathan was a massive, massive, massive whale, okay? Almost as big as the world itself, surrounded by, in the water, surrounded by some fish and some really rough, low-level like aquatic life. That's all the entirety of the world was. And actually, there's a lovely quote here that I want to go and read out to you just to give you perspective here. No, not a Leviathan, the Leviathan. The Leviathans you're thinking of are big, sure, but they don't even come close. Those things are just fish beasts, bastard sea monsters cobbled together by some planeswalker and called Leviathans to scare people. And that's the 10/10 creatures that we know as Leviathans in the Magic. Like, as the Magic cards, the Leviathans, that's what this is referencing in that regard, which to me is absolutely amazing. So if we had a God Leviathan and Dominaria was completely submerged and waterlogged, how do we get to the point now where we have all these different continents, all these different amazing characters and things like that? Where did it all come from? Well, the God Whale pulled a bunch of life into himself. This God Whale has two different stomachs, okay? One is to sustain himself, and one was basically a playground, a gigantic ecosystem where he was conducting different experiments, playing with life and things like this, right? Because the God Leviathan was the only intelligent being on all of Dominaria. Everything else was just mindless sea creatures, just eating and surviving, unable to remember one moment. You know, the goldfish effect, every 30 seconds kind of concept? That sort of concept, where they were all just mindless eating machines, and just, there was no intelligent life in the entirety of Dominaria, except for the God Leviathan. And now, as you can imagine, that's a lonely, lonely existence. So the God Leviathan started to tinker with the life forms that existed inside of it. And it started to tinker, and it ended up with very rudimentary merfolk, okay? That was like the first stage. Rudimentary merfolk. Now, it's not 100% clear whether this was a combination of evolution and magic or just magic through the God Leviathan, but these merfolk, they started to just grunt. That's it. They just started to grunt and whatever, and slowly over time, they developed a language as they learned, oh, you know, these grunts mean this. They teach it to their kids, and they go on and they go on. So you get generation after generation of merfolk, and then you finally get to the point where these merfolk, they're swimming around, and you got to understand that the God Leviathan's stomach is massive, and there's all kinds of stuff he's doing. All like it's like an entire balanced ecosystem, and it's almost a world into itself. The stomach has a bunch of water, but also air. This is buoyancy or something like that to keep the Leviathan at a certain level in the water. But either way, it's an air and water ecosystem, and along the inner sides of the lung there. Not the lung, sorry, the stomach lining, above the waterline, this strange kelp started to grow. Now, it was at this point that some of the merfolk started to try and like experiment with that, and one of them managed to get up there and get some of this kelp. They called it air kelp, and he tried it out, and it was oh, this is amazing. It acted essentially as a drug. And so there were a certain number of these merfolk that became addicted to this air kelp. So they would start to they wanted to harvest it. But the problem was it was dangerous getting it up off the sides of the stomach. I mean, these are sea-dwelling creatures. They only breathe water, right? These are not air-breathing creatures. So slowly over time, they started to, either through evolution or the magic of the God Leviathan, they started to spend more time up out of the water with this air kelp. And so they started to develop lungs and legs and things like that. So they're starting to partially live up on the side wall of the stomach, up out of the water. Now, at this point, there was a fracturing in the merfolk community. There were essentially two groups led by two different either individuals or dynasties. It's not 100% clear whether they're talking about an individual or just a running family that shared that name. So you had Kleetok and Andalades. Okay, so Cleatok was the leader, the king of the air-breathing, wall-living merfolk, and Andalades was the high priest, like leader, spiritual leader of all the merfolk who had stayed in the water. And so Cleatok was obsessed with getting more of this air kelp. And Andalades, like basically when the air kelp was brought back to the Merfolk society, it splintered them in half. Half of them were like, oh, we love this, and half of them, no. So half of them that loved it moved upwards, while the half of them that disliked it moved deeper down into the stomach of the Leviathan to go ahead and build coral cities and things like that. Full on societies. So basically you have a situation where these two societies are evolving in different ways. Now, the God Leviathan, either through evolution or the God Leviathan's gift, and it's most likely the God Leviathan's gift, the leader of the Cleatok dynasty was given the ability to fully speak out into the air with the Leviathan, and became the only voice that the Leviathan would hear. No one else, the Leviathan heard the voice of no one else, the merfolk talk in the water, nothing like that. Cleatok was the only one with an actual voice who could speak out into the air. So he became, at first, he started like basically as kind of like a pet of the God Leviathan. But over time, the relationship changed as Cleatok went to the Leviathan and was like this kelp. Basically, one of the effects of the kelp was to create voracious hunger in these wall merfolk, and at the same time it accelerated their breeding rates too. So you have a situation where they're ingesting this kelp, it's making them hungry, more voracious, and they're breeding at a more rapid rate than the merfolk. The merfolk are more slowly increasing their numbers, okay? So it's reached the point where the humans, there's not enough space on the side of the Leviathan's stomach wall anymore. So Cleatok beseeches the Leviathan. He's like, please, I need islands for my people. I need space for my people. There's too many of us. We don't have anywhere to go. We can't live in the water. We don't breathe water. We breathe air. So the God Leviathan complied. He rolled his stomach and forced islands to jut up out of the water in his stomach. Now, the results of this were catastrophic for the Andalades merfolk that were deep down in like the bowels of the stomach. That's a funny way to describe it, but down in the depths, their coral cities, it was as if earthquakes were going off. So their cities were being smashed and destroyed by this. So basically, things are going better for the wall merfolk and worse for the bottom of the stomach merfolk at that point. So this continues onwards, right? The situation doesn't get better from here. Cleatok and his dynasty are now inhabiting the islands. It gives them more space to breed and to grow and cultivate this air kelp. And so they're all basically eating this air kelp constantly. Their hunger has reached the point where the natural ecosystem of the God Leviathan's stomach can no longer support the voraciousness of these humans. At this point, they're no longer merfolk. They have reached the point where they're fully humans, they're voracious, and so Cleatok says to the God Leviathan, I cannot feed my people. I need more food. So Cleatok said, okay, no problem. He opened his giant mouth and he pulled in a massive amount of fish. He sent half the fish to his own stomach to basically keep him going, and half the fish to the other stomach for Cleatok's people. So Cleatok's people would fish up these fish, and they would fish out crabs and things like that and eat them and throw their remains down into the water. And then as they're doing this, obviously their numbers are growing and growing, because you got to understand, this is generation after generation after generation growing up inside the God Leviathan's stomach. This isn't instantaneous. This is a long period of time. So over time, Cleatok keeps basically demanding more and more space for his people. As a result of this, there's less and less space for the Andalades people, right? They're down in the bottom of the stomach where there's less and less water now. And a side effect on top of having less and less water, you've got all these fish that are swarming in. Now, the humans were voracious and could keep eating the fish, but the merfolk weren't nearly as numerous or ravenous. So they couldn't keep up and eat all these fish. And the problem is these fish would raid their clam beds and other stores. So the fish were a nuisance. On top of that, the Andalades were having the garbage and filth of the humans rain down on them. All the fish bones, boiled crab shells, all that just raining down onto the Andalades like territory. And meanwhile, Cleatok is just making more and more demands, to the point where the God Leviathan has to keep bringing in more fish from outside of him. But now instead of diverting half to him and half to the human side, it's going, for every 2 fish going to the God Leviathan, 3 are going to the human side. And then it gets even worse. 1 for the fish, 2 for the humans. And then it gets to the point where the God Leviathan isn't actually sending any to himself anymore. And he's saying to Cleatalk, look, there's not nearly as many fish out there. We're running out of fish. But Cleatalk doesn't care. His greed for his dynasty and his people growing is the only thing he cares about. So he continues to make demands on the Leviathan. And the Leviathan, it has no interaction with people before this, right? It can, as wise as it is, it's still naive. It's giving in to Cleatalk's demands because it doesn't know what to do. Now, the high priest of the Andalades is freaking out because his people are in serious danger. And no matter how much he tries to beseech the Leviathan, there's no way to reach out to him. The only voice that he will hear is King Cleatalk's. So what do? Andalades and the rest of the Merfolk get together and they develop coral tools to carve through the God Leviathan's stomach. And they do that. They get through his stomach lining and they get into his innards. And Andalades swims through the God Leviathan until he gets up inside the God Leviathan's ear. And there he discusses what's going on with the God Leviathan and finds out. Andalades had no idea that the God Leviathan was not feeding itself or the dire circumstances. But Andalades then went on to convince the Leviathan that the humans were a scourge. The Merfolk, Andalades said, my people are dying and doomed. I need your help. So together, they hatched a plan. And while this was all happening, Cleatalk was raging and making demands. Now, all of a sudden, the god is no longer listening to him. And he's freaking out and raging. So what the Leviathan did is in one, basically, large blast, it expelled the entire contents of its stomach out into the world. It just went, and it blasted the humans way up, flying up into the air, and the Merfolk out into the waters, right? And after it had blasted them out, then it did this huge intake and it drew in an insane amount of water from the world to actually lower the water levels enough for all the islands to rise up out of the water. And the humans landed on these different islands, and that's how they ended up being there. The Merfolk ended up in the sea, and the God Leviathan departed with words to Cleatalk, saying, one day you will understand, and when you do, I will return. So if humankind was to ever wish to return to living all under the ocean inside the God Leviathan, all they would have to do is beseech them and acknowledge the wrongness of their ways. But clearly we all know that's never going to happen now because this is ancient Dominarian history. Who even knows what the Cleatalk dynasty became? I certainly don't. I found this to be an absolutely fascinating origin story. Let me know what you guys think. It's time to check in with the sixth color of magic.
Together, we are the sixth color of magic.
All right, and now we reach an interesting part of the episode, because normally this is when I roll the golden scroll, but we've got a little bit of interesting new news. We have channel memberships now. And anybody who has a channel membership, you joined up before, you're now part of the Golden Lords. We're doing it in a way where anybody who either has a channel membership or is on my Patreon will now officially be a Golden Lord and also have Discord access. YouTube just gave me the ability today to set these perks up. So I went ahead and did that. Now that means, because I already do have channel members, we are inducting a bunch of Golden Lords. Because Carly's under the weather, I didn't have her cross-reference this list ahead of time. So what I'm going to do to make sure that I don't miss anybody is I'm going to read off the list of all 19 of you guys. You may already be on the scroll, so if I'm saying your name again, don't worry, we're not going to duplicate you. I just want to make sure everybody who is the Golden Lord gets mentioned and added on the list. So here we go, welcoming up to 19 new Golden Lords. Ken Jensen, Randy 14512, Rebecca Heinrich, Mental Dichotomy, Michael Cobbler, Mr. Habanero, Badia, Noel Corriveau, Jeffrey Draws Comics, Tristan Brown, Jay Boosh, Daryl McClurg, Adam Daly, Zig-Eye, Phil Karras, Aspartan Polar Bear, Backbone 5, Jenny Fedora Productions, and Chad Ends. To those of you who were not already on the Golden Scroll, welcome aboard, my friends. And from now on, anybody who wants to be part of the Golden Lords, take your choice. You can click the join button on this channel or hit my Patreon. Either is fine by me. And now, my friends, What would you like? Would you like some magic or some magic? Hail to the king, baby!